Hey everyone, Kabi here, and today I wanted to talk about a problem that's been plaguing video games, specifically first-person games, ever since they were created. What is that problem? Players in video games are floating cameras, and video games will try really hard to hide this. They'll do a lot of things. They'll have the camera shake around. You've probably heard this called view bob. Outlandish visual effects like motion blur and lens flares, which doesn't really make sense because our eyes are not photographic lens. This is all for the concept of immersion, where the player is immersed in the levels, into the world that the developers designed, not just some loser in front of a screen. There's a lot of camera tricks, there's a lot of parlor tricks, like I said. The first person view model. So what is the view model? Well, it's usually the hands and tools or weapon that you're using in first person that you can see on your screen through your camera. The first person view model, which has been around since the 90s, since Doom, since 2D sprites, that is a trick. Functionally, that model on your screen is doing nothing, usually most of the time. Okay, I'm not gonna say in every case, but there's an entire industry based around just animating view models, view model animations. One of the mechanics or features that has been around for decades but is recently coming into the mainstream, goes by a lot of different names. Immersive camera, there's enhanced camera, there's full body awareness. I'm just gonna use one, and I'm gonna call it first person body. The first thing I do when I go into a video game is I look down and I see if I have legs, if I have a torso, because that shows a lot about how much effort the developer is willing to put into the quality of the video game, in my opinion. Going with what I was saying earlier, video game developers will go to insane lengths to hide the fact that you're floating camera from the player. Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, people were commenting on how weird it is not to have legs. How many fucking billions of dollars on trying to get legs in his video game, quote unquote, the metaverse. But enough about Zuckerberg's vanity project. Let's talk a bit about more mainstream first person games. Halo had this feature all the way back in the early 2000s. Past that, you'll see though that most games before the late 2010s, they just completely omitted it. BioShock, Half-Life, a lot of these cornerstones of first-person video games don't have it. Minecraft even. People just didn't want to render the body. Only when Call of Duty, flagship for first-person games in a sense, started doing this in the late 2010s, and a lot of other studios have followed suit. Even in the middle of a series, you'll have the first-person body being implemented in a later title. For example, Metro in the beginning didn't have first-person legs. This is a mechanic that's been gaining traction, gaining steam across many years of video game development. So let's talk a little bit about the implementation of the first-person body. There are two ways, I would say, of doing this, two methods. The first is the true first-person method. Now, the game that comes to mind immediately when I say this is Arma. So the model of your player, the 3D model of your player, is rendered exactly in first person. Now that seems like, oh, that will just fix the problem. Why doesn't every game do this? Well, it comes with its own set of problems. Arma 3, DayZ. You'll notice that when you look down, you can even look around, right? You'll see your arms and your legs and your body. And it's very realistic and it feels very normal. The problem is when those body parts start moving. There's a certain jankiness to them that is hard to describe. Third person body in first person can be a little jarring. So first of all, there's the first hurdle, which is making the camera look natural when it's just attached to your third person model's head. Now, you might wonder, okay, what's the problem with that? Isn't that what our eyes are attached to in real life? Why would attaching a camera to a head in a video game look bad? And it's because your eyes and your brain actually do a lot of stabilization for you when you're running around or walking around or moving around in the real world. It's very hard for a camera to mimic those effects in a video game engine. So you can see that Star Citizen spent a lot of money. I mean, they have tons of money just sitting around in piles to solve this problem. The second problem is if you just want to use a world model, you use your third person model for everything, including your arms, well, then you can't have a view model. And why would you want a view model? First of all, it feels a little bit more natural usually. It looks a little bit better. It's easier to calibrate the animation to look good in a first person view than it is to calibrate a animation or model made in third person for the first person view. And second of all, it makes it so that there's something on screen. It grounds the player in the world And third, people are used to it. And it also allows you to have the view model on a separate render layer, so they don't clip with objects in the world that they might be clipping with otherwise. So that's where we get to the second implementation. And this is what I like to call the two model method. So Gary, the developer of Gary's Mod and Rust, made a blog post that explains this method extremely clearly. So here you can see his result. And the way he accomplishes this result is by doing a little trick with the third person model. So in the first method, we talked about the true first person quote unquote method. We render the whole body. So the way that the two model method approaches this is by also rendering the third person body, but either by cutting out or, as you can see in this case, tucking the upper torso behind the camera so it doesn't conflict with the camera at all. So in essence, what we can have now is the view model, which we're used to from first-person games, used solely for the arms, and we can have also the world or the third-person model being used for the legs and the rest of the body, so that when you look down, you can see it. This is the method that plenty of AAA titles are now using. Modern Warfare, Halo, even Destiny. But there are still plenty of games that don't have the first-person body. You have Overwatch, Valorant, Doom, Apex Legends, Counter-Strike, although this may be changing in the future. Why are not all games doing this? And the simple answer to that question is that it's hard. This process actually has a lot of nuances. And again, this can be explained with the example of mods that try to implement the first-person body into games that don't already have this feature. So we have Joy of Perspective, a first-person body mod coming out for Skyrim in 2012, less than 3 months after the game released. And in 2022, people are still working on this problem 9 years later. Fallout New Vegas actually had its enhanced camera, its first-person body come out in 2014. This is using the hybrid method. As you can see here, it's using the first-person model and the third-person model as well. This was created by the same guy who made Logic Dragon, who made enhanced camera for Skyrim. With Bethesda engines, a lot of this stuff carries over. Fallout 4 is another game based on the whole Bethesda engine line of Game Pyro engine. It's all descended from this engine. So you'd think that Fallout 4 wouldn't be that hard either. Well, it's been 7 years since Fallout came out, and a lot of game development, obviously, right, doesn't happen in the public eye, happens in back channels, and, you know, it takes a lot of time. But the problem is for Fallout 4, so much has changed with the camera and the way it's used in Fallout 4, so the original approach does not work. And the way the camera is handled undoubtedly is different from older iterations of this same engine. For these types of mods that change base mechanics of the game, oftentimes you'll have to get closer to the engine. And because of that, it's hard. It's harder to make these mods. We have Hope in the form of a post by Redshark. So he starts his post by saying, unfortunately, it's definitely going to be a F4SE restriction. It's still being worked on, just not by me, since my knowledge is severely limited in F4SC C++ scripting. And what does he mean by that? Well, C++ scripting is essentially engine scripting, writing code on the engine. So people are, like I said, reverse engineering the engine code to try and get this to work. And that's in this image, which the first-person body is mostly implemented. You have the double arm problem we talked about earlier, but other than that, it's pretty much done. As you can see, they're pointing in the wrong direction because what we see in third person is not necessarily what we want to see in first person. Remove these arms and we basically have it in Fallout 4's iteration of the engine as well. And this will probably work also in Starfield and whatever newer games that Bethesda is developing. Similar methods will work because as engines iterate, so will mod authors. So will these people who are writing engine code for these games, trying to implement this feature, they can also progress and build off of each other. So it's all a big framework. Of the 1,000 people that look down and think, man, maybe it would be better if I had some legs here, there is going to be one person that steps up and actually makes it happen, actually learn how to work with an engine and reverse engineer an engine to make it bend to their will so that you can see legs. People are clearly passionate about it if they're putting it into their video games, spending hundreds, if not thousands of hours trying to do so. People playing first-person games want this feature in their games. Okay, so that's about it. I just wanted to talk about this feature and this video game mechanic, concept, whatever you want to call it, for years now, and outline some of the exciting work that's been going on recently. We have similar mods also coming out for Anomaly, Stalker Anomaly, and hopefully Stalker 2. The hope is that in the future, this will be the new norm for first-person games, and if not, modders will take up the mantle and make it happen. Alright, that's about it from me. See you in the next one.